Your dreams are bigger, bolder, and more badass than the life you're living now, but something just keeps getting in the way. Join certified coach and former therapist Diane Wingert for the Driven Woman podcast. She'll show you how to get rid of whatever is holding you back so you can stop spinning your wheels and up-level your life. Get ready to hop in and buckle up. This is the Driven Woman podcast, and we're heading for the fast lane.
Well, hey, Driven Woman, and welcome back for this no bullshitting, hard-hitting solo episode. Today's topic is quiet quitting and whether you are quiet quitting in your business. Now, you may not know what quiet quitting is, so let me just take a quick little hot minute to tell you about that. Quiet quitting is a new term, but not a new phenomenon. It basically refers to, in the world of work, doing only what's necessary. No more going above and beyond. You're not coming in early and staying late. You're not socializing with coworkers. You're not letting your paid time off pile up and refusing to use it because you want to show how committed you are. You're not schmoozing with the higher ups. You're leaving on time. You're taking your sick days when you're sick, including mental health days. You're not opening emails before work, after work, or on weekends. You're not blowing up the Slack channel outside of working hours. Could you say quiet quitting is doing the minimum? Is it the same as what used to be called coasting? And why has work culture changed so much that this has become something that all of the major newspapers and business periodicals are writing about? Well, I got a lot to say about it, so don't go away. First of all, quiet quitting is nothing new. Millennials didn't invent it. Gen Z didn't invent it. And TikTok didn't invent it, although it's kind of being talked about more on TikTok than anywhere else. And a lot of the people who are talking about it on TikTok are Gen Z. Now, a lot of Gen X and boomers are saying that younger generations just haven't been socially conditioned to the world of work. But I say, as somebody who has been working since she was 15 and a half, and I have seen many generations come along since mine, that the world has changed since the boomers were running the show. Now, there are still boomers in the workplace, plenty of them, but they are not the only generation in the workplace. We've got boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and all of these different generations have a different relationship to work, to purpose, to employee-employer relationships, and entrepreneurship. I mean, for boomers, if you even knew an entrepreneur, you were in a very special category because it just wasn't a popular choice. Most boomers aspired to get good grades, get in a good college, get a good job, work hard, stay the course, be rewarded with periodic promotions and raises, and to be able to retire with a nice pension, or at the very least, a goodbye party. Well, you know what? A lot has changed. A lot of people aged out. A lot of people got pushed out. A lot of industries have completely closed up shop. There have been so many mergers and acquisitions, so many companies that have outsourced, offshored, downsized, merged, and laid off millions of people. That dream that so many people had, and frankly raised their children to believe they would have, those days are over. And I think it's a good thing, but it is also traumatic, because if you've been raised by parents who told you, go in early, stay late, ask your boss for additional responsibility, make sure the higher ups know who you are, go above and beyond. Listen, I was a supervisor, a program coordinator, a manager, an assistant director, a director, an executive. And I can tell you, I was never looking for people who were quietly quitting as promotable because I came of age in a work culture where you literally wanted people to go above and beyond. You wanted them to put work first. Now, we were not thinking about the rest of their lives. We were not thinking about the parents, the spouses, the children, the communities, the congregations, hell, the gardens they were neglecting, the pets. We were only thinking about when you're here, do your best. But the limits and boundaries around what you do when you're there and what you take home with you were pretty effed up by today's standards. I mean, the reality is that you probably couldn't have gotten away with quiet quitting in many, many workplaces in the past because the focus was so much on the employer getting the very best of you during your working hours. And those working hours, if you were an employee, didn't really have hard lines. I wrote many performance reviews over the years, and I wasn't even allowed to give exceeds standards to someone who came in on time, left on time, used all their PTO, and just did what was expected of them. Was not allowed. So there's been so many changes in the last 10 years, largely as a result of technology, but for many other reasons too. And I especially want to speak to the fact that in the last 2.5 years, as a result of the COVID pandemic, a whole lot of folk have had some very rude awakenings. We've lost people. We've lost opportunities. We've lost connections. We've become deeply aware of just how fractured and broken so many of our systems are. And that comes with a loss of innocence that we can't just forget when the boss says it's time to come back to the office. One of the things that I become aware of because I have dogs is the number of people who really had a serious, difficult time adjusting to working from home. And many of them adopted a dog or a cat because they were lonely. They were accustomed to going to a workplace and having connection with other beings. Now they're at home and they were lonely and they felt really isolated and disconnected. A lot of those animals, unfortunately, are now going back to shelters and are being, hopefully, some of them rehomed because employers are insisting that people come back to the office. It's been quite a fascinating phenomenon to see all the people freaking the fuck out that they were told to go work from home. And after a couple of years of that, they don't want to go back. It was a hard adjustment, but they've adjusted and now they don't want to go back. And for the record, I think some of the people who are quietly quitting now are folks who literally begged their employers for years to create more flexible work hours, to create at least a hybrid model or a part-time remote working model, only to be told, we don't do that here. That's not possible. That won't work. We can't. No. And they felt resentful because why don't you even try? Now, I won't even say post-COVID. We're not post-COVID, but we're deep into living with COVID. Guess what? Many of these same employers have learned you can let people work remotely. And many of them are experiencing what they knew they would all along, which was an improved quality of life. Why? Because instead of going to 20 redundant, mind-numbing, unnecessary meetings per week, they're actually able to go for a walk with their dog, take their baby out in the stroller, fit in a nap, or even go for a run when that never, ever would have been possible coming to the office 5 days a week. So I think it's just far too easy to call this a Gen Z problem or to say this is only happening because These younger generations just don't understand the world of work. I think it's why we're hearing conversations now, especially on social media, that instead of praising the hustle culture, best associated and best known for being promoted by people like Gary Vaynerchuk, we now have toxic productivity. And we now have the great resignation followed by quiet quitting. Now, you might say, well, people are lazy. I mean, if you're on TikTok, I'm sure that you remember seeing Kim Kardashian's little video, nobody wants to work anymore, right? And then a lot of people responding and stitching that because there are people who think nobody wants to work anymore. But there are many more people who think if you want us to work for you, you have to make it worth our while. You can't just bully people, shame people into a culture that no longer meets people's needs. I mean, I think about all the millennials who have gone into absolutely crushing student loan debt only to not be able to get a decent paying job in their chosen field and are now working, doing something that they never intended to do, may not even like doing, and they're expected to bring their A game and consider themselves grateful and lucky to have any job at all. I mean, can we have a little compassion and a little understanding for just how drastically the world has changed in the last 20 years? I mean, I will tell you, if I had any idea what the world was going to look like now, I wouldn't have pushed so hard for my kids to go to college. I wouldn't have, because it's simply not the guarantee that it used to be. And it does not make any sense at all to go into excruciating debt for something that no longer has the ROI that it once did. Just doesn't make any sense. And I know I'm using some blanket statements and broad sweeping terms, so I do want to acknowledge my privilege, and I want to acknowledge that quiet quitting is probably not now, nor has it ever been an option for people of color, for queer people in the workplace, and for people who are neurodivergent, because they are already under greater scrutiny. So if they do less than go above and beyond, there are going to be more serious consequences. And quiet quitting, meaning it's not doing your job. It's changing the way we look at appropriate expectations for what our job is. Because all of the things that got you employee of the week, employee of the month, employee of the year, or on the fast track to promotability, whether you ever got the promotion or not, if you were identified as promotable, it was because you were doing a whole bunch of things with no guarantee that you would ever get any kind of payoff for them. And this was not a victimless crime. All that energy that is spent coming in early, staying late, going above and beyond is sort of the catchphrase. There's an expense to that. The opportunity cost of being able to work on your mental and physical health, your relationships, your hobbies, rest, relaxation, rejuvenation. If you're doing all that work first kind of stuff, something's got to give. And I think it's why all of these things kind of go together, right? We've got the great resignation. We've got quiet quitting. We've got a lot of people talking about, anti-hustle culture, toxic productivity. And I think that all of this is one of the reasons why entrepreneurship has become a viable option for more people than ever. I mean, first of all, a lot of people get pushed out of the world of work for one reason or another. Their job is made redundant. They age out because they're in a glamour industry. They just get sick and tired of seeing less qualified people promoted past them, and they become demoralized. Their employer relocates and they can't move or don't want to move. They don't want to disrupt their children, their spouse. So being loyal to an employer and making every possible sacrifice is no longer a strategy that makes sense for a lot of people. While entrepreneurship, which 30 years ago was really only something that a very small number of people even knew was an option, while everybody else was socially conditioned to get the education, get the job, stay the course, and retire fat and happy. A lot of people became accidental entrepreneurs, unintentional entrepreneurs, people who their life circumstances changed and they can't get a traditional job. So they started a business because they really couldn't find work any other way. There are so many people who have started their own businesses in the last 10 to 20 years because of ever improving technology, because of the opportunities presented by the internet, and because the workplace is not the sure bet that it once was. Now, in the second half of this solo episode, I want to talk about whether you might be quietly quitting in your business. Kind of flip this on its head because, let's face it, some people do the quiet quitting as a strategy because they've taken a stance that if I'm not being paid to do something, I'm not going to do it. And if I do something I'm not being paid to do, something that is not in my job description, I'm going to resent that. And that's going to introduce something negative in my relationship with my employer that doesn't need to be there. So I'm going to give them exactly what I'm being required to do and paid to do and nothing more. You might even think that that's something that should be applauded because the people who take that stance with no attitude about it may very well have a life outside of work that is so much richer and more satisfying that who they are at work is much more productive and creates much better contributions. I mean, that's another possibility and another way of looking at it. There are also people in work who are quietly quitting as a form of being passive aggressive because they got a gripe, they got a grudge, they got a beef, and it's not safe for them to address it. And there's also people who think they're quietly quitting, but they're actually well on their way to burning out, and they haven't identified that. So let's take a quick little break for this announcement, and then I'm going to come right back and talk about whether you might be doing some quiet quitting in your business, why that might be, and if so, what to do about it. I'll be right back. Hey, it's Diane with a quick interruption to the episode because I've got a couple questions I just need to ask you. One, are you where you want to be in your business? Are you making the money you want to make, working the hours you want to work, seeing the clients that you want to see, and getting the income and impact that you went into business to get? And if the answer is no, what's holding you back? Why is there a gap between where you are and where you want to be? Do you know the answer? In my experience working with female solopreneurs, so many of them don't even really know what's standing in their way, and that is so frustrating. So I created a little quiz called What's Holding You Back? There's a link to it in the show notes. If this is you, please take the quiz, and if you do, DM me on Instagram at Coach Diane Wingert and let me know your results. Now, on the other hand, if you already know what's holding you back, if you already know what the obstacles are that are getting in your way from achieving the income and impact that you deserve and desire, then I don't want you to take the quiz. Forget about the quiz. Go directly to the other link in the show notes and book a consult with me. I may be the very coach, and this may be the year that you put all of that behind you and really have the business that you went into business to have. For everybody else, keep on listening. And if you find value in what you hear, don't forget to leave me a rating and review on Apple or wherever you're listening. Here we go, back to the show.
now looking back, a year from now to today, I'm a completely different person. Even, from the very first day that I started to work with you, I realized things are going to be really different. I mean, actually, I know before we even spoke, when I heard you on that podcast, I thought, this woman is exactly what I need. And honestly, I've never met anyone like you. And I'm so appreciative of everything that you've done. I mean, just sharing your experiences with everyone and being so open and honest, and just seeing you and how you interact with other people and how you share your experiences has helped in that recalibration in my own mind, because now I can accept myself for who I am, and I don't have to apologize for who I am. Who I am is who I am, and I love who I am. I'm not perfect by any means, no one is, but I'm freaking awesome.
Okay, I'm back. So let's talk about whether quiet quitting has worked its way into your entrepreneurial venture and whether it's serving you. Okay. So let me just say that most of us worked for somebody else before we started our own business. I've met a few people who started their own business in high school or right after college, and they will proudly tell you they have never worked for anyone but themselves. But they are a absolutely distinct, teeny tiny minority. The rest of us have experience working for someone else, maybe many someones, before we started to do our own thing. And one of the things that I think can kind of follow us and affect how we show up as entrepreneurs is that work culture in general does not reward superstars. Most companies will tell you otherwise. Most companies will tell you that we want you to do your best, but there really isn't room in most corporate culture for people who are true superstars. And by true superstars, I mean outliers. I mean people who are disruptive in their way of thinking because it's so creative, so original, and they really just don't give a shit about the status quo. These people may be hired as consultants when a company feels like it's really stuck and not growing or, maybe trending down, but they generally don't last long in the corporate world because corporations rely on a certain amount of conforming to the norm and people adhering to things that they're mutually agreeing upon. I mean, let's think about human resources. You've got a job description, you've got performance evaluations, you've got this is when you come in, this is when you leave. Most workplaces require a fair amount of conformity. Now, in the tech world, I know that there's a lot more flexibility and there's a lot more room for flexible work hours, flexible way of showing up, and a lot of unique and very different transformations to the work culture. This hopefully will begin to transfer to other workplaces, but most workplaces would not be able to handle it, quite honestly. So if you've been a superstar, that may be one of the reasons why you became a solopreneur, because you got shot down for your good ideas. You got shot down for questioning the status quo. You got shut down for asking, why do we do it this way? Why don't we try that? Could we just do it as an experiment? You're generally thought of as being kind of a pain in the ass. And many people who probably would be very good bosses for someone who's willing to kind of follow the expectations and the norms may become a very, very bad boss to someone who's an outlier and probably somebody who really should be an entrepreneur. But I've also worked in situations where these folks end up leaving corporate because they're just too different, too disruptive, too creative, too out of the box. So then they create a startup and now they're making their employees miserable because their employees need some structure, some consistency, some limitations, some boundaries. They kind of need to know what the expectations are from day to day. So it can kind of really come back to haunt you. And I've even seen entrepreneurs kind of quietly quit because they become disillusioned, right? But what we're calling quiet quitting, it's kind of like when I did the episode on imposter syndrome. I believe I called it the cure for imposter syndrome, and I'll make sure we link to it in the show notes, because oftentimes people are using the term imposter syndrome. That's not actually what's going on. A lot of people are talking about imposter syndrome when they actually have a skill gap or they are overstating their qualifications. Same thing with quiet quitting. People may call what they're doing quiet quitting when actually they're freaking exhausted and they may very well be on the path to burnout. People will behave in a way that looks like quiet quitting when they are experiencing a lot of resentment. The resentment may be towards how many hours they're putting in their new venture. The resentment may be towards how demanding they feel their clients are. The fact that their team members may not be as committed to the success of the business as they are because it's not their company. I have known many solopreneurs who reach a point of genuine disillusionment because they thought they'd be further by now. Ask yourself if you haven't had that thought. I thought I'd be further along by now. I didn't know it was going to be this hard. I'm really annoyed by seeing people with 1/10 of my experience call themselves experts and have a much bigger following than I do. Have you had any of these thoughts? Now, if you think along those lines on a regular basis and you're not able to make changes and do something about it, you may very well start to behave in a way that looks an awful lot like quiet quitting, even though it's your business. I think one of the hardest things about being a solopreneur is that most of us are doing it without mentorship and without support. And while I don't think it's particularly helpful to do a lot of raging and venting, I think it has some value for at least a short period of time. If you don't have anyone that you can spew and fume to when things don't go your way, you probably should set like a 5-minute time limit because, nobody really wants to hear that stuff. But it does have some value to be able to do it. Every single one of us could be at risk of burnout. And if you see that you are behaving in a little bit of a passive-aggressive way towards your team, towards your clients, the solution isn't quiet quitting or anything that even looks like quiet quitting. The solution is to figure out what in your business isn't working so that you can change it. I mean, so many of us became entrepreneurs because we didn't feel that our efforts were being adequately acknowledged, recognized, rewarded in the workplace. But to think that that would automatically happen just because you're the boss is not very realistic either. Now, is there a time in your own solopreneur journey where quiet quitting might make sense? I think if it's intentional, you can probably do it for a short period of time. I'm in a period right now where I've recently gone through some very significant events that were individually and cumulatively quite exhausting. And I wouldn't describe what I'm doing right now as quiet quitting because I have no intention of quitting. And I know that I'm going to bounce back. But have I reduced my effort a little on a short-term basis so that I can restore my mental and emotional and physical well-being? Yes, I have. And I know exactly how much time I'm going to give myself because if you followed me for longer than a minute, you know that I strongly believe all human behavior is habit forming. And that includes thoughts, feelings, and actions. So I know that if I pull back and only do what's necessary, that I can only do that for a relatively short period of time as a business owner before it will have consequences. You see, sooner or later, you fall behind. And falling behind causes stress. So if the quiet quitting is meant to relieve stress, it can only go on so long before the falling behind begins, and then that causes stress. So I think if you have reached a point where you need to do a little bit of quiet quitting, make an agreement with yourself, make a commitment to yourself and to your business that it will be time limited. The world of work is changing by the day. It will continue to change. Now, it will provide losses and gains. And what serves us all is to pay attention, to be aware, to stay relevant, and to constantly assess and reassess our situation to know, are we doing what we should be doing right now? And is it in alignment with our personal goals, our lifestyle goals, and our values? And most importantly, is it sustainable? I think the phenomenon of quiet quitting has come about and has become so prominent that many very smart people are talking about it, because the way so many of us have been living through all the changes we've experienced in the last few years is simply no longer sustainable. Crisis equals opportunity. We are still in the midst of crisis. Now, you or I may not be the people who will figure out where the opportunity is in it, but somebody will. So watch for those people. Because if what you're doing now is not sustainable in your business, if it is on the slow or quick path to burnout, and if your behavior in your own business looks an awful lot like quiet quitting in corporate, you owe it to yourself and to the people who care about you to really reconsider what's working and what isn't over the long haul. I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any feedback you'd like to offer me, you know you have several ways to do so. You can send me an email. You can DM me on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can hit me up on the SpeakPipe widget on my website. And of course, you can always leave a review for the podcast. We will be back next week with another exciting guest interview. I can't wait to join you then.
You've been listening to the Driven Woman podcast with Diane Wingert. Want more straight talk and strategy each week that will take you from spinning to winning? Don't forget to hit subscribe in your podcast player so you won't miss a single episode. Then head on over to the Driven Woman free and private Facebook group community. See you there.